sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?
Wisdom Through Action is a contemporary sea-influenced school teaching the work of personal inner development in the system brought to the Western world by G.I. Gurdjieff and P.D. Ouspensky. Mr. Ouspensky said, "The most important ideas and principles of this system do not belong to me. This is chiefly what makes them valuable, because if they belonged to me, they would be like all other theories invented by ordinary minds." What he meant was that this system comes from higher mind, from conscious influence. It is an objective system to bring a man to awakening.
Welcome to Wisdom Through Action. I'm your host, Kay Smith. In today's show, you're going to learn about Gurdjieff's law of accident, ways to escape, and how to have some control over all that is impacting your life. In this work, man is regarded as not conscious. The first increase of consciousness we can develop is through real self-knowledge, by means of self-observation. Change means to change what one is now. One can no longer retain the same opinions or judge others in the same way. It is not to add to what one is, but to change one's being. In a few minutes, we are going to show you a 30-minute video that uses the emotional function to explain what we are describing here right now in the intellect. We imagine we are fully conscious. We live in a world of sleeping humanity, and we ourselves are asleep. Anything can happen in this world, and everything does merely happen. It always will unless we wake up. If we could awaken, a new world would become possible. First, this requires the acknowledgement that we are asleep, and then the giving up of the illusions and pictures of oneself. All our theories of improving the world while we are still asleep merely intensify the sleep of humanity. There are 4 states of consciousness, actual and possible to each. First state is the state of sleep with dreams. Second state is referred to as waking sleep or waking state. Third state is the state of self-awareness or self-consciousness and self-remembering. Fourth state is the state of objective consciousness. In the first state of consciousness, we are actually asleep in bed. In the second state of consciousness, we walk about the world occupied with our daily affairs, thinking we are awake. The third state of consciousness is the first truly waking state, and is actually our birthright. The fourth state is consciousness of the truth of things as they are. Unless we can attain the third state of consciousness, we cannot receive help. Help can only reach us when we realize we are asleep. Man asleep cannot obtain help. We can get help if we work on ourselves, and through self-remembering, raise the level of consciousness in ourselves to a higher state. Then help can reach us. When one realizes one is asleep, one realizes one must have help. There's a work parable that illustrates the situation of man at present. Mankind is fast asleep and is walking towards the edge of a precipice that it does not see. But an individual man can wake up to the realization that he is on the edge of a precipice. And if he were to open his eyes to this, he would see that there is a rope above his head, which he can climb up. But in order to reach this rope, he has to jump. When we are on the level where we imagine we can be helped as we are, no help can reach us. For anything better to exist, we must change ourselves. Complacency, self-satisfaction, vanity, ignorance, all these and many other things prevent help from reaching us. Prayer was originally to ask for help to lift one to a higher level of consciousness. The Lord's Prayer is designed to make a man remember himself, for an entire change of his being so that help can enter him. The nature of help is, first, to show us where we are wrong. This work teaches that there is help, but it only touches a man and makes its presence known when he lifts himself up to it. That is, when he lifts himself up to the third state of consciousness. If we really feel our situation, we will try to lift ourselves to a new level of consciousness. What is the soul of a culture? What is our work all about? It is to enable man to live consciously in 3 bodies, in 3 worlds, and so realize the divine plan. A physical body was given him by nature at birth. Somewhere exists the original divine spark launched from God, and which refound will be his conscious spirit. But ordinary man has no feeling for that body which was created to connect the two, the soul. The soul is the bridge between body and spirit, between earth and heaven. It is there, but you have to become aware of it. You have to feel it. You have to live in it.
What then is the soul of a culture? But in some way, the soul of a civilization will be the totality of the souls of its children. The sum of all those who throughout its whole span have achieved consciousness. It will be all the human consciousness achieved within that culture. Its traces may perhaps appear to us in those highest scriptures which describe the pattern of the universe and the way to consciousness of it. These may reveal different souls, as the New Testament is different from the Quran, and both from the Vedas. But at bottom, the soul of a civilization can be made of no other material than the souls of men, and that with which the souls of men connect.
Now, the soul of a civilization is fed in three ways. Those three traditional ways by which men may become conscious and develop individual souls of their own. These ways, and the schools of regeneration which exist to administer them and teach their methods on earth, depend upon the idea of developing consciousness first in one particular function. By becoming fully conscious in one function, a man finds his way to consciousness of his whole being. By transforming the nature of this one function, he transforms his whole self. By acquiring an instrument to control one function, he acquires a soul.
The first way to consciousness is through the instinctive and motor functions. The second way is through the emotional function. The third is through the intellectual function. The first way is something akin to what in the West is known as asceticism, though it contains very much more than this word has come to mean, and we use it only for lack of a better. This is the way of achieving consciousness by mastering physical functions by overcoming pain. It is the way of transmuting pain into will. In the East, it includes many fakir practices, and in its full form is known as Hatha Yoga. But whereas the more passive Oriental may follow this way by holding his arm above his head, or by sitting on the top of a column for 7 years, like Saint Simeon, in the more active West, the mastery of the body usually takes a quite different form. In modern life, the best examples of men going by the ascetic way are certain explorers or mountain climbers, men who in attempting to reach the poles or scale Himalayan peaks endure appalling hardships and force their bodies beyond the limits of endurance under compulsion which they can never fully explain. Scott and his companions slowly freezing to death at the South Pole, Irving and Mallory climbing on alone toward the summit of Mount Everest, which they could never reach and from which they could never return, were in fact Western fakirs, engaged in making themselves souls by the first or ascetic way.
In this way, neither the question of motive nor of understanding enters. The fakir may be earning the only living open to him. The self-torturing anchorite may be trying to forget a girl. The superlative athlete or acrobat may be hungry for publicity. It does not matter. Driving the body consistently past pain in the fear of death is a fact irrespective of motive. He who does so may create a soul. His soul is made by bravery.
I have to overcome that safety mechanism that wants to rise up in me and to keep me from doing something that could kill me.
So this fear of the unknown becomes like something you absolutely have to confront, because there is no way to turn back your decision.
And each one of those guys, they'll put themselves on the line for guys that they don't even know, or guys they might not even like. But it's part of their personality. It's part of their nature. It's so when they go home at night, they sleep well, because they don't think, well, I should have, I could have, why didn't I? They do it.
The second way depends on a marriage of what are known in the West as mysticism and charity, though both words are unsatisfactory. It is the way of achieving consciousness by mastering the emotional function by overcoming fear. It is the way of transmuting fear into love. By this way, a man welcomes all situations which ordinarily give rise to fear or distaste. Precisely to show that these emotions can be transformed into something quite different. That is, into quite new sensations of ecstasy. He welcomes poverty, celibacy, sickness, absolute obedience to the will of a religious superior, and many other limitations of ordinary pleasure. He sacrifices all small and trivial emotions in order to acquire one great and transcendental emotion. St. Francis of Assisi is perhaps the best Western example of a man going by this way, and his embracing of the leper is a classic demonstration of the method of acquiring love by overcoming fear. Others, who like Florence Nightingale, deliberately overcome their natural repugnance in order to serve the sick, the poor, the old, or the oppressed, may also be unwitting candidates for this, the second or emotional way to consciousness.
Here, it is clear, motive is of prime importance, though understanding is not. A man who is charitable in order to be well thought of will acquire nothing, though his every natural inclination be sacrificed in the process. For by this way, it is the emotion, not the fact, which turns the key. Without positive emotion, every visible effort will be but a pretense, hindering rather than helping inner growth. With love, the result may be obtained without a man even realizing the difficulty of what he does. His soul is made by goodness.
Why? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store in barns. Yet our Heavenly Father feeds them. Is there any man among you who by anxious thought can add a minute to his life or a foot to his height? Why the concern for your rich vegetables? Consider how the lilies grow in the fields. They do not work nor spin. Yet even Solomon in all his splendor was not attired like one of these. How little faith you have. You ask, what are we to eat? What are we to drink? What are we to wear?
He tries to think of everything that happens to him, of everyone he meets, not in relation to his personal likes and dislikes, but in relation to great principles. In this way he gradually becomes liberated from a subjective point of view and acquires objective understanding. Not only was this the way of great thinkers of clerical and philosophical schools in the past, of St. Thomas Aquinas and Isaac Newton, for example, but in our day also it is particularly open to those of scientific mind, provided they actually try to live all sides of their life by the great laws which they study or discover.
To succeed in this way, a man must understand what he does and why. He must sacrifice self-deception, prejudice, and inconsistency. His soul must be made by wisdom.
The significance of Einstein's work is that it was really fundamental to an understanding of the nature of the universe, the nature of the world in which we live, and that it was characterized by an astonishing amount of originality, new ideas. When he was 15 years old, he had asked himself, what would the world look like if I were speeding along on a motorcycle at the speed of light? What would I see? Well, you see, he answered that question in his 1905 paper on special relativity. And presumably, from the time he was 15 until 25 or 26, 1905, he kept thinking about that question.
He developed an indifference for material things, calling each possession a stone tied round his neck. He wrote, "The commonplace goals of human endeavor, possessions, outward success, and luxury have always seemed to me despicable. In science he found an escape from what he considered the dreariness of daily existence and a connection with a larger universe."
We thus see that the three ways, asceticism, charity, and philosophy, not only produce separate schools of their own, but may also be followed by independent individuals having no outward connection with any school at all. And again, they may be included as separate orders in some great historical school, such as the Roman Catholic Church. There is, however, a fourth way about which much less is ordinarily known. This way consists in mastering instinctive, emotional, and intellectual functions at the same time, in transmuting pain, fear, and thought into their higher counterparts of will, love, and understanding simultaneously. In this way, a man tries to be conscious in at least 3 functions at once, and he tries to harmonize the work of these functions to make them help each other and serve the same aim. Thus, if he forces his body to carry out some very difficult task, he also deliberately works to transform the petty fears and resentments which may arise from it. And further still, he tries to understand what he is doing and why he is doing it. And to relate everything connected with his endeavors to the great natural laws with which he has already made himself familiar. In this way, he has 3 separate fields of study, each of which explains and reinforces the others.
Thus, the consciousness which is developed by the fourth way is more general. It embraces all sides of man, and it is less likely to leave some fundamental weakness or dangerous deficiency unseen. For this reason, unlike the ascetic and mystical ways, which usually require the immediate sacrifice of all that is familiar, in translation to some quite new conditions, like those of a desert or a monastery, the fourth way is carried out in the conditions of ordinary life.
The man going by this way has to carry out all his experiments and efforts in his usual surroundings, and all these experiments, apart from the inner results for which he works, must also yield external results which are reasonable and beneficial from an ordinary point of view. The fourth way towards consciousness is sometimes quicker and sometimes apparently slower than the other ways, but its chief characteristic is that it is more harmonious and thus more sure.
The man who has learned to transform his emotions only in the special atmosphere of a monastery, if suddenly required by fate to struggle for his living in the business world, may find all his methods useless and his work wasted. The ascetic, on the other hand, who has acquired will living in a cave and fasting, if suddenly placed in conditions where all kinds of physical pleasures are freely accessible, may find himself overwhelmed by appetites whose existence he did not even suspect. The man who has worked by the fourth way, on the other hand, and who has endeavored to become conscious in all of his functions and in all situations, will not be so easily caught. For him, consciousness will not be dependent upon special associations, but will be that which accompanies him always, fasting or drinking wine, alone or in a crowd, laboring or meditating. It will be that which lights up all that happens.
If the ascetic must be brave, the mystic good, and the philosopher wise, he who tries to go by the fourth way must learn to be brave, good, and wise at once.
From this, it would appear much more difficult to work in the fourth way than in the other 3. In one sense it is. He who tries to go by it constantly finds himself losing the thread, which no dogma, method, or belief can assure to him. On the other hand, for many people, the fourth way represents the only way open to them, for no other way will accept them as they are, or show them how to pass through and transmute the interests, loves, longings, weaknesses, and habits which they are quite unable to abandon at one blow.
Schools of the fourth way have existed and exist, just as schools of the three traditional ways existed and exist. But they are much more difficult to detect because, unlike the others, they cannot be recognized by any one practice, one method, one task, or one name. They are always inventing new methods, new practices, suitable to the time and conditions in which they exist. And when they have achieved one task which was set them, they pass on to another, often changing their name and whole appearance in the process. The schools of the Fourth Way were undoubtedly behind the designing and construction of the great Gothic cathedrals, though they had no special name and adapted themselves to the religious organization of the time. For a time, the Cluniacs sheltered them. For a time, the Freemasons. In the 17th century, similar schools were responsible for much of the new scientific and medical research, sometimes under one name and sometimes under another. In the 18th century again, Fourth Way schools borrowed many of the discoveries of Greek and Egyptian archaeology to clothe their ideas and their organization. While some of their leaders, in order to penetrate the luxury-loving and sophisticated circles where they had work to do, might even appear in the guise of fashionable magicians or mesmerists. The Fourth Way endeavors to introduce consciousness into all sides of life, and its form is always connected with that which is most new, that which prepares the future.
Gurdjieff taught that it was quite important to understand that things happen in human life according to 4 laws. The law of accident is where mechanical man, or man number 1, 2, and 3 live. Under this law, anything can and does happen. There is no connection between what happens in the event. Good hap or bad hap, as Dr. Nicole refers to them, are equally accidental and are not the result of any action that you took. It can be seen as a combination of circumstances which are independent of will, fate, cause, and effect. An accident happens when 2 lines of events cross one another. For instance, a brick falls off a building and falls on a man's head. There is nothing in the life of the brick or the life of the man to connect the 2 of them. For someone working on themselves, learning to stop the inner accidents, such as negativity, identification, features, and all aspects of our mechanical psychology, will, over time, help to prevent external accidents as well. Next comes the law of cause and effect. This is when the outcome of any event is actually based on previously taken actions, or, in other words, the law of cause and effect is the result of your own actions. For example, a person runs a stop sign each day on their way to work. After some time, there will be an effect to this cause, either a ticket for not stopping or a car accident. On the other hand, when you keep your car in good working condition, regular maintenance, tires correctly inflated, and so on, the effect will be that your car will not break down and leave you stranded. The more a person works on themselves, the more they come out from under the law of accident and more under the law of cause and effect. Third comes the law of fate. This refers to things with which man is born: parents, siblings, physical capacities, health, etc., as well as birth and death. It also, however, refers to important big events in our lives, such as war, a major medical situation, a divorce, a lawsuit, the loss of a loved one, and so on. While there may be some things about this law that cannot be avoided, for instance, heredity or physical characteristics, for someone working on themselves, how you handle these events is quite important, because with conscious action, you may be able to change the outcome. Change of fate can only come about through the next law, the law of will. In the law of will, unlike the popular notion of willpower, when we follow one desire as opposed to another, the law of will pertains to developing higher states of consciousness, permanent I, and unity, so that every action we take is weighed and measured in relation to conscious action. Things happen all around us, and we are affected by them. At every moment, our life is intersected by other lines, so that accident controls most events. The action of one machine affects another machine. We are surrounded by possibilities of accidents. If one does not happen, another does. So we must understand our situation. In men 1, 2, and 3, there is no control. Practically everything in their life is controlled by accident. There are some things which are the results of their own actions, but they are all on the same level. Control begins on a different level, and it starts with ourselves. Control of our reactions, states of consciousness, functions, and so on. Then, little by little, we may come to some measure of control in the sense of avoiding one influence and approaching another. It is a very slow process. When do we cease to be under the law of accident? When we develop will. To be completely free from the law of accident is very far, but there are different stages between complete freedom and our present position. In ordinary conditions, accident is opposed to plan. A man who in one or another case acts according to plan escapes in these actions from the law of accident. But actions conforming to plan are impossible in ordinary life, except in conditions where the combination of accidental happenings chances to coincide with the plan. The reasons why it is impossible to fulfill a plan in life are, first of all, the absence of unity and constancy in man himself, and the new lines which continually enter man's line of actions and cross it. This can easily be verified if a man tries to follow a plan in anything that does not happen, or is opposed to the general trend of momentums operating in his life. For instance, if a man tries to remember himself, to struggle with habits, to observe himself, and so on, he will see that his plan is not being fulfilled, and the result is quite different from what he intended, or that everything stops altogether, and even the initial impulse and the understanding of the necessity and usefulness of these attempts vanishes. But if he continues to study himself, to make efforts, to work, he will see that his relation to the law of accident gradually changes. Our being subject to the law of accident is a definite fact that cannot be changed completely. Such as we are, we will always be under a certain possibility of accident. Yet little by little, we can make accidental happenings less possible. The theory of accident is quite simple. They happen only when the place is empty. If the place is occupied, they cannot happen. Occupied by what? By conscious actions. If you cannot produce a conscious action, at least it must be filled by intentional actions. So when work, and everything connected with it, becomes in truth the center of gravity of man's life, he becomes practically free from the law of accident. And what do we call a center of gravity? Well, the idea of center of gravity can be interpreted in many different ways. It is more or less a permanent aim and the realization of the relative importance of things in connection with this aim. This means that certain interests become more important than anything else that one acquires, a permanent direction. One does not go one day in one direction and another day in another direction. One goes in one direction and one knows the direction. The stronger your center of gravity, the more you are free from accident. When you change your direction every moment, then every moment something new may happen, and every accident can turn you one way or another. But if your intentional activity, such for instance as self-remembering, becomes so definite, so intense, and so continual as to leave no room for accidents, accidents will be much less likely to happen, because accidents need space and time. So we have to add more causes which will produce results, and in this way simply exclude accident. Because the more our time is occupied with conscious work, the less room will be left for accidental happenings. I wanted to read from A Simple Explanation of Work Ideas. This was written by Maurice Nicole. You may have heard about one of these chapters in a previous show. Man is regarded as unfinished, incomplete, imperfect. He has the possibility of completing himself, perfecting himself, and all that is necessary for this lies in him. He is an experiment in self-evolution. As he is mechanically, he is incomplete and undeveloped, but is capable of a further inner development. For this reason, it is said that man is a self-developing organism. In the New Testament, man is compared to a seed. It is said that unless a man dies to what he is now, he cannot evolve into what is possible for him. A definite transformation is being spoken about, by which the experiment can be completed. The idea that man is a self-developing organism means that he cannot develop under compulsion. To see God in the flesh would mean man being compelled to believe by the evidence of his senses, but man cannot develop in this way at all. He can only develop through understanding. If man is a special experiment on this earth, as distinct from the animals which cannot undergo an individual evolution, what does it mean? It means that a man can only develop internally if he begins to understand the necessity of it and seeks for the means himself. It is only through internal freedom, which is one's understanding, that a man can evolve. No external compulsion can bring this about. When we see we are wrong and realize what we are like and how we behave, then from this basis, self-evolution becomes possible. We begin to change when we begin to understand ourselves and see the need. Man is free to change himself through his own understanding. This is the only sense in which he is free, and this freedom no one can take from him. No one can change life or other people, but each person can change himself. This system begins with a man, with oneself, with you, and its object is to change you, yourself. No rules, rituals, ceremonies, or regulations, even if their aim is to develop man, can change him unless he begins to understand. The work, therefore, begins by teaching that we must try to enter into ourselves and begin to see ourselves. Prayers, pilgrimages, etc. are useless because they are taken externally. It is only through new knowledge and work on our being that new understanding can be born. The next idea is that man is in a bad situation on this earth. The earth is a small point in the solar system. The solar system a small point in the Milky Way or galaxy, and the galaxy is only one of many galaxies. Man is in a bad position under many laws which do not necessarily contribute to his well-being. Cosmically speaking, man is a small thing in the universe, a new experiment which might be wiped out in favor of another experiment. Man becomes of consequence only when he realizes his meaning and destiny and begins to live more consciously. If man were only a machine, he would not suffer his inner painful doubts and uncertainties, simply because he would then be a machine. But everyone knows in a dim way that this is not the case, and that they should be different. The third idea about man is that as long as he remains asleep and mechanical, he is used. If man were incapable of doing anything about himself, his position would be without hope. He would be subject to all that happens around him, floods, diseases, war, etc. It would be his sole life. But if man is created a self-developing organism, life cannot fulfill him and is not supposed to fulfill him. His full meaning is not in life. But life uses us, owing to our position on this planet. Rearrangement of outer things still leaves us under the same laws that use man. As long as being remains the same, mankind attracts the same kind of life recurrently. The only starting point of change is in us, in our spirit. All mankind is asleep from the point of view of this system. We are asleep, and in this state, mankind can do nothing. Today, mankind is being used more and more by cosmic forces outside him because he has discarded the power to awaken. This system turns around the central point that man is a self-developing organism, capable of evolving through his understanding and changing his level of being, by which means he can come under new influences and reach help. In the first two states of consciousness, we are mechanical and cannot change. Only at the third level of consciousness, or self-remembering, can man alter his situation on earth. So if you're ready to wake up and change your state of consciousness, contact us. This is what we teach here at Wisdom Through Action. I'll see you next time.
Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?